Welcome to the new world of work, thriving or surviving. Please welcome to the stage Hereditary Chief Janice George.
Tanoyap and Sequatals, Ayas Chop Tanoyap, Ayas Chop Tanoyap, Japchemia Siam Koshamitsna, Tinachant Lasnak, Skachot Mish Uchomeoch. Good evening, everyone. I'm really so honored to be here, surviving and thriving. My people have done that from the beginning of time. Yes, as I said, I'm so proud to be part of this brilliant discussion with these genius people. And I wanted to say that really it's a part of what I feel is a part of our tradition, is people coming in and talking about what's going to happen with our next generations. How are we going to help our next generations thrive? Our ancestors have done that from the beginning of time. As one of the largest landowners in Vancouver, every day I'm grateful to those ancestors for the work that they've done. It's important to know who we are and where we come from, to know where we're going. So welcome to all of you who've come here tonight. And I'm so honored and excited to be part of this OCM.
Please welcome to the stage the president of Simon Fraser University, Andrew Petter.
Good evening, and thank you, Chief Janice George, for that wonderful greeting. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are indeed privileged to be gathered on the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And let me welcome all of you to the 2018 SFU Public Square Community Summit. This summit had its origins in the strategic vision that Simon Fraser University set for itself in 2012. A vision that committed us to be Canada's most community-engaged research university. Within that commitment, we resolved that SFU should serve as a forum for public dialogue, believing that the health of communities, local and global, depends upon citizens coming together to share information, exchange views, and seek common ground. One result was SFU Public Square, which provides programming year-round and once a year hosts a community summit on a question of public importance. This year, we've chosen to focus on the rapidly changing world of work, and we've suggested the context with our summit title, Brave New Work. It's a nod to Aldous Huxley's warning in his novel Brave New World that utopian futures are easier to imagine than to achieve. Consider our current situation. Changes in the world of work are full of promise. From one perspective, advancing technologies and a more integrated world hold huge potential to enhance our quality of life. Automation, improved communications, and globalization have already driven efficiency gains and are transforming workplaces here and around the world. Optimists look at these changes and foresee better times ahead, greater productivity and opportunities for all. They note that technologies produce new jobs even as they eliminate old ones, pointing out, for example, that tech industries are this province's fastest growing sector. But pessimists consider the same set of circumstances and reach a very different conclusion. They focus on the potential for technologies to disrupt industries and displace workers. The Brookfield Institute reports that 42% of the jobs that Canadians currently hold can be automated using existing technology. And noting growing disparities in income and wealth, they fear that sweeping technological change will only benefit those who control the technologies at the expense of those who do not, creating a richer and more powerful elite and a larger and more vulnerable underclass. But perhaps optimists and pessimists can agree on this. If we hope to maximize the benefits of all this change and to minimize the risks, citizens must act collectively with a sense of shared purpose and determination. And that's the agenda for this community summit, to engage you, the public, in a dialogue concerning how we shape the future of work, how we build the society we desire. As you can see from your summit programs, we've already been holding sessions on emerging trends and opportunities, on the possibility and problems of a guaranteed basic income, and on innovations in research. And we're in the midst of a 2-day workshop with thought leaders looking at ways to reframe work. And we have 6 more days of engagement on everything from the risks of climate change to the potential for creating more resilient economies, including, of course, the role of education as an instrument for individual and social betterment. So I encourage you to participate not only tonight, but in these further activities. This evening, however, promises to be a highlight. And I'd like to acknowledge and thank our friends at Vancity for partnering with us in this event. Tonight, we look at the new world of work and we ask, what does the future hold? Will we thrive, or will we be lucky to survive? I'm excited to say that we'll be led in this exploration by 2 leading American thinkers on the economy and the world of work. Van Jones, founder and president of Dream Corp, former Green Jobs advisor to President Barack Obama, host of the celebrated CNN series The Messy Truth, and currently of The Van Jones Show. Anne-Marie Slaughter, Princeton professor emeritus, president and CEO of New America, former director of policy planning for the U.S. State Department, and author of the influential Atlantic article, Why Women Still Can't Have It All. We're also fortunate to have as our moderator, CBC senior correspondent and host Laura Lynch. A native of Vancouver, Laura holds a journalism degree from Carleton University and a law degree from the University of Victoria, where for her sins she was a student of mine. Don't worry, she's recovered. In more than 2 decades with CBC Radio, she's covered the world as an international correspondent in London, in Washington, D.C., as well as in Africa and the Middle East. Since her return to Canada in 2012, Laura has broken major stories on issues such as Canadian policies with respect to Syrian refugees. She's also a regular guest host on The Current, As It Happens, and The Sunday Edition. Her groundbreaking journalism has earned her numerous awards, including the prestigious Nieman Fellowship from Harvard University and appreciation from Amnesty International. We're privileged to have her with us this evening. So please join me in a warm welcome for celebrated journalist and accomplished moderator, Laura Lynch.
Hello, everyone. I'm so pleased to see the House so full tonight. It is a testament to how important this subject is that you braved the wet, windy weather that is Vancouver toward the end of February, and you braved the traffic that comes with the Canucks game. This is a better place to be. I will say that I am not the poster child for the future of work. I have worked largely in the same craft for pretty much the same company for about 25 years now, and I've been very lucky to do that and have a number of different challenges. But I am betting that so many people in this room tonight, or people that you know, have been affected by disruption, by technology, and for some of you who are young, I know it's a very uncertain future for what will come next. So I think that what we're going to hear about tonight will be relevant and will be thought-provoking for all of you. I just want to give you a rundown of how the evening's going to play out. In a moment, I'll welcome our 2 guests to the stage, and they'll give, in turn, their views about the future of work. And after that, I'll have a conversation with both of them about issues raised by what they said. Now, a gentle reminder to all of you, if you could please put your phones on silent, and no filming is allowed tonight, no matter how much you are a fan of the great people we have here. But don't switch your phones off, because actually tonight you all have a job too, which is appropriate given the subject we're talking about. It involves something called Slido, and it is not a game app, which I thought it was the first time I've heard it. It's a way for us to take questions from you here in the audience and also from anyone who is watching this on our live webcast. And here's how it works. I'm going to have to read this because I don't understand it. If you are here in the room with us, you can submit your question online at www.slido.com on your mobile device. If you're watching at home, just click on the Slido link below the webcast. Once you get into the Slido website, enter the event code, which is Brave New Work, all one word, not case sensitive. And there's no need to download anything. Just visit the website, plug in the event code. Once you do that, you'll be able to submit your questions online, and you can see the questions that other people in the audience have submitted, and then vote for the questions that you most want answered. And we've got a team here backstage that's going to be monitoring Slido throughout the evening. Toward the end of the night, a member of the SFU Public Square team will be coming on stage with some of the top questions that you, the audience, have asked and selected. Now, I'm just going to say a few more words about our guests tonight. I know Andrew had a few words to say about them. Anne-Marie Slaughter is the president and CEO of New America, a think and action tank dedicated to renewing America in the digital age. She is also the Bert G. Kerstetter 66 University Professor Emerita of Politics and International Affairs at Princeton University. From 2009 to 2011, she served as Director of Policy Planning for the U.S. Department of State, the first woman to hold that position. And Dr. Slaughter has written or edited 8 books, including The Chessboard and the Web, Strategies of Connection in a Networked World, and Unfinished Business, Women, Men, Work, and Family. Please welcome Anne-Marie Slaughter. And our second guest, Van Jones, calls himself a social entrepreneur, a CNN political contributor and host of the Van Jones Show on CNN, which I see is climbing up the ratings on cable. Mr. Jones is a Yale-educated attorney. He is the author of 2 New York Times best-selling books, The Green Collar Economy and Rebuild the Dream. He was the main advocate for the Green Jobs Act that was signed into law by George W. Bush in 2007. It was the first piece of legislation to codify the term green jobs. And in 2009, Jones worked as the Green Jobs Advisor to President Barack Obama. Please welcome Van Jones. Woo! Well, we could just sit here and talk about Trump and politics, but
No!
no, I know we're going to be focused on the world of work tonight, and I don't want to waste too much time because I know you both have thought deeply about these. So, Anne-Marie Slaughter, can you please talk to us first?
I can.
Take the stage.
Thank you. I think I've probably been to 10 or 15 conferences over the past year and a half called The Future of Work. Everyone is talking about, are the robots coming? Are the robots not coming? Will there be any job? Will there be jobs? Will there be good jobs? Will there be tasks? It's all up here. And it's an important debate, but honestly, the work that my organization has done when we think about the future of work, we went across the country and had meetings in 5 different cities and talked to lots of people about what they thought, forget the academic analyses, and what we discovered that was particularly important is that most of the scenarios that people imagined, so some people imagined, well, there'll be more work and it'll be jobs and we need to retrain for those jobs, but they'll be there. And other people said, well, there's less work, but, and it's the gig economy, so even when you can get the work, it doesn't support you, and that really is not a good scenario. And then things in between where people said, well, you know, there may be less work, but it'll be jobs. That looks a little like France, where if you have a job, that's great, but hard to get one. And other people said, no, there'll be more work overall, but it will be tasks. And hard, you can put lots of different things together, but you don't have the same kind of stability and security you have traditionally. Those scenarios are happening now, which is why I'm so pleased to be here to talk about the brave new world of work. Not abstract futures, but what is happening right now and how we can develop it, improve it, plan for it, and make sure that it is a brave new world and not a nightmare. So I'm going to talk about where jobs are in 3 big categories. And the first is care, and the second is craft, and the third is the circular economy. And you can tell I was a professor for a long time. I like alliterative things that you can remember. So 3 C's, care, craft, and the circular economy. So let's start with care. And I'm going to give you some numbers. They're US numbers, but given demographics, they have to be roughly the same here. In the United States, there are 10,000 baby boomers turning 65 every day. And I know there was a baby boom here too. Everybody came back from World War II. So 10,000 a day. 70% of people over 65 will need long-term care. And 80% of that care is provided by a family member. In addition, caregiving jobs are increasing. They're one of the sectors that is increasing. This is the brave new world of work right now. And they're increasing, to some extent, by some figures, 49% faster than other areas of the market. So if you think about the demographics just of baby boomers retiring and needing care and living longer, we hope, as a baby boomer, at living longer, what that means, particularly with dual income families needing to provide that care, needing help to provide that care, that's a huge number of jobs. And then millennials, the oldest millennials are in their mid-30s, and they're starting to have kids. And as they are now the largest demographic in the United States, as they start having kids, those kids need care. In the United States, child care for 2 children costs more than the cost of rent in all 50 states. More than the cost of rent. That can't be true in Vancouver. But that's not because child care is not expensive. So, and of course, we know, I was thrilled to see that British Columbia has committed, the government is committed to create 60,000 more daycare places, and we're going to need those places. So already you see elder care and early education. Now let me stop for a minute and talk about the nature of those jobs. Often, when you talk about elder care or child care, people think about physical care. They think about bathing and feeding and dressing at both ends of life. Okay, yes, that is a piece of it. But my own experience from child care, all that physical stuff, that's just the platform for engaging that child in conversation, in teaching, occasionally in discipline, in helping them grow. And we know now that the quality of interaction in the first, certainly 5 years of life, really 8 years of life, shapes a brain in ways that determines what that child can learn for the rest of his or her life. So we are not just teaching them stuff, we are creating synapses. We are building neurons. There is frankly nothing more important for a society to do than investing in that project. And on the other end, there's enormous improvements in geriatrics. We know that really good elder care can give older people what Atul Gawande calls their best day for a long time. And as a society, we owe that to our own parents, but we also want older people to be as productive and as autonomous as they possibly can be for as long as they can be. All of which is to say that those jobs in elder care and early education need to be much better paid, higher valued, and require training. All right, so that's the first part of the care economy, and you can see that. You can see that, as I said, demographically. We have the science. The question is how we make that transition. But that's a narrow definition of care. That's a sort of starting with the physical, expanding, but focusing on children and elders. The care economy means all those jobs that involve investing in others. When I was working on my book on work and family, I read this little, very thin little book that was published in 1971 by a male philosopher, and it was not on work-life balance. That term had not been invented, and he wouldn't have been thinking about it. But it was a male philosopher, 1971, who wrote a book called On Caring. And what he was writing about was the phenomenon of how, as you invest in others, they grow, but so do you. It is one of the most enriching areas of life there is, and care involves teaching. Indeed, when I think about the teaching and mentoring I've done, it's very similar to parenting in many different ways. And of course, it involves medicine, health care, very broadly understood. And what we're seeing in that sector of the economy is the steady splitting apart of what used to be single jobs. So there used to be doctors. I mean, obviously there were specialists among doctors, but now increasingly there are physician's assistants and therapists of many different kinds, all of whom are doing parts of what a doctor did, and the actual doctor who has most training, he or she is then doing the particularly high-end version. Similarly with nursing, we had registered nurses. If you've checked recently, obviously you have registered nurses, you have licensed practical nurses, you have nurse practitioners, and many more specialized kinds of nursing and care. Similarly, in teaching, you have teachers, of course. Now we have master teachers, we have special ed teachers, and we have increasingly, as we know more and more about learning styles, teachers who are specialized in helping specific groups of the population learn. Those are the jobs we have now. They are growing, they're splitting apart, they're requiring different specializations. They're new jobs. I don't know if any of you have noticed how coaching is expanding. Now, in the business world, coaching is code for therapy, but nobody wants to admit it. Great, I'm all for it. Get an executive coach. That's fine. And therapists have caught on to this. But it is not just, you can have career coaches and lifestyle coaches, and we've just been through the Olympics. Do you know any athlete who says, oh yeah, I have a coach. Yeah, I had a coach for about a year when I got started. Or I had a coach for this game. That's ridiculous. You have a coach as long as you are performing. If you are a singer, you have a coach for as long as you are performing. We know that peak performance requires continually benchmarking your progress, getting better, learning how to improve. That's coaching. And as we shift to investing in our talent, coaching will continue to explode. Also, new job out there, navigators. More and more, when I talk to people who are working in the social sector, and in terms of like helping people get benefits, helping people navigate complex systems, there's a new term, and it's a job called navigators. Even advising, and a lot of these jobs actually get better the more tech you have. So college advising didn't ever used to be rocket science. Now, increasingly in large universities, I don't know if SFU does this, but we have data about when students are most at risk. So advisors actually know what to look for, know what the signs are to make sure that they can enable students to stay in school and succeed in school and graduate. And that job is a much more sophisticated one than it became. Now, I hope you noticed something about coaches, navigators, and advisors as opposed to nurses and teachers. Those are man jobs, right? Coaching is a care job that is perfectly respectable for men. My grandfather was a football coach. When you look at a good coach, a sports coach or a life coach, that is care. If by care you mean you're teaching, you're mentoring, you're disciplining, you're pushing them out of the nest and forcing them to do it on their own when as necessary. So a coach is a job, it's a care job that a man is more comfortable taking. Navigator, that used to be sailors under the stars. And advising in various ways. Mentor was Odysseus's advisor back in the Odyssey. We haven't cracked the code on nurses, although there are more and more male nurses. And in Virginia, in the United States, there's a whole campaign called Are You Man Enough to Be a Nurse? I think that makes a lot of sense. You've got to have an awful lot of confidence as a man. But we need men in these jobs, just like we need women in traditionally male jobs. Why should boys and girls only see women in in elementary ed? Why should we have only women in hospitals? Why should men not be eligible for this whole raft of growing jobs? Okay, so care. And I would say the one way to think about the care economy as investing in others, I think of it as human capitalism, e.g. we invest in human capital, and it may be more humane capitalism as well. So let me talk now about craft, there's a wonderful book that is not out yet. It's coming out in May, and I didn't write it, so I'm not plugging my own book. It's a book by James Fallows and Deb Fallows. Many of you will know James Fallows. He writes for The Atlantic. He's spectacular. He and his wife, Deb, spent 3 years flying around the United States in a small plane that he piloted, not a private jet, a small plane, and landing in all sorts of places and looking at what is happening, the signs of American renewal. And what he noted was that all the cities, and these are medium-sized cities, smaller cities, that were thriving, one of the hallmarks was craft beer. And I am certain that Vancouver has craft beer all over the place. I've got to believe that. And what they write in this book is he says, a city on the way back will have one or more craft breweries and probably some small craft distilleries. And yes, in Kentucky, whiskey, Canadian whiskey, I've just been introduced to it. It's fabulous, craft distilling. A town that has them also has a certain kind of entrepreneur and a critical mass of young people, of mainly young people, mainly young consumers. Older people like craft beer too, but his point is that craft beer culture, entrepreneurship, critical mass of young people, and he says that explains a lot. And beer's just the beginning. What makes craft beer? You're combining new digital technologies with traditional craft, the cottage industry before the factories took over. Obviously, you do that with food, you do that with chocolate, you do that with coffee. In fact, some of the things that we got in our basket, wonderful crafted chocolates and coffee here in Vancouver. Woodworking, right? We got a wonderful cutting board from, let's see. Oh, East Van Roasters, as you know, is your crafted coffee and chocolate. And woodshop, right? But tiles, metalwork, all the work that we used to do. When you think about our names, Turner, Cooper, Baker, Miller, those used to be jobs we did locally, and those jobs are coming back as part of craft. Beyond that, the advent of 3D printing is creating opportunities for a whole different kind of manufacturing that is more customized to individual customers, as the name suggests, that you can do more locally, that you can try things locally, and if they don't work, you try something else. So that traditional 20th century manufacturing is high volume, factory scale, very high stakes. In the 21st century, and this is happening again, even with big companies like GE, it's smaller scale, lower volume, lower risk, but lots of opportunity for trying out new things. So the craft economy is the second big area we are seeing these jobs. Finally, the circular economy. And the circular economy in two ways. The first, we need to tear down much of the buildings, the built environment of the 20th century economy to make room for the 21st. I see this. I live in New Jersey. The parts near me are one long strip mall, essentially from Princeton, New Jersey to New York, which is about an hour. There is one continuous strip mall. More and more that mall is empty. And we see that because we are buying online, or we are buying in smaller local places, but not those big box stores. So what's going to happen? Well, first of all, you notice gas stations turned into cell phone shops. That was sort of one part of the transition. Increasingly, we're going to be tearing that down. We're going to be tearing it down, and we're going to be repurposing those materials. Or in some cases, we won't be tearing down, but we will be renewing. And you see main streets across the United States and Canada coming back. They've got great bones, and they simply need to be renewed. That's an enormous amount of work. Of course, you can automate a lot of construction, but there's an awful lot of that work that is going to need people, and it's important work. It's work that requires design and creativity and thinking about the new environment. In cities, if we think about automated vehicles, already we're thinking about what do we do with all those parking spaces? What do we do with the parking garages? How do we remake our city for that economy? The second way, of course, that it's a circular economy is we'll build back better, or we'll renew better. We'll use sustainable materials. That cutting board that I got from woodshop here in Vancouver, repurposed materials. And we will see that over and over. We've got an enormous amount of raw material or renewed material from that 20th century economy. This is where we have to truly be imaginative. As we reimagine our built environment and as we reimagine our work, we have to make as big a leap of imagination as someone had to make who was living in the agricultural age before the first industrial age. No one could imagine a big city with factories and offices, right? Production was localized. And now I say, well, you know, you can live anywhere you want. You can live in a medium-sized town, a big city, a small town, and you can work digitally. And people say, no, that really doesn't work. We've tried that, but really we need people back in the office. And the places that have done that, they're realizing people need to be back in the office. Well, yeah, that may be true in some cases. That's because that firm still has an office. You don't need an office. You really don't. You needed an office because it was more efficient. But if you start thinking about entirely new businesses that are digital, that come together in various ways, I believe in people coming together, but they can come together in increasingly sophisticated technology, and they can come together in WeWork spaces, regular centralized meetings, but none of that requires the built environment and the way we work now. We work now by going to the office. That is going to seem a peculiar 20th century thing. So let me conclude by, again, your 3 C's. These are jobs happening now. The care economy, growing craft and well beyond craft beer, but that is the opening bid, and I'm very glad it is, and the circular economy. We can see these jobs growing, but we can also see what they need to be. Just as we can see that care is not paying someone really non-livable wages to mind a child. Care is taking that same person and providing education and training and investment in those caregivers, early educators, so that we are investing in our children. And similarly for our older people, and then creating an entire new categories of jobs that are about helping all of us reach our highest potential. And that can't be automated. You can help, but it can't be automated. Thinking about craft, thinking about making things again, which is a wonderful thing in all sorts of new ways. And then thinking about as we reimagine our world of work, we reimagine the world we live in, where work and life and the other things you care about no longer need to be so dramatically separated by hour-long commutes. Getting there will take vision, it will take investment by government and by the private sector. It will take the willingness to let go of things that have provided security for a long time, but believing that we can actually create a better world of work. That is sometimes in short supply, that kind of thinking. I think it is much more in supply right here, right now, than anywhere in my own country, or let me just say anywhere official in my own country. There are lots and lots of smaller towns, medium towns, and some big cities that are doing it. But I want to end where I started. The way to think about this is not an abstract debate about the future of work. It is to think, in this community, in this city, what does work look like going forward now? Where do we see it, and how do we make it better? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anne-Marie. I think you gave people a lot to think about, and I think people were thrilled to hear you refer to the craft breweries as a sign of success in this city. She knows how to go local. Next is Van Jones to talk about his view of the future of work.
First of all, it's good to be here. Usually, I don't get this opportunity, and I just want to acknowledge that tonight's a good night for me. I have a microphone on, and there's lights in my face, and I do not have a Trump supporter to my left or my right. Hallelujah! Hallelujah! Oh, it's a good night. Good night. Oh, thank you. Look, I joke about it, but it's a real thing that we do spend, I think, too much time on the mainstream media, at least in my country, going from kind of tweet to tweet to tweet, and some of the bigger issues we never get around to. Personally, I think one of the reasons that people are so upset, which we don't talk about enough, is, honestly, Game of Thrones has been delayed way too long in terms of,
Yes.
the next season, and it doesn't. So we have to, watch this crap all day in real world, and it's terrible. So
Without dragons.
But I talk about the Game of Thrones because it's very similar to what's going on, I think, in Western capitals, and certainly in mine. An awful lot of intrigue, a lot of infighting, a lot of nonsense. But the White Walkers are coming, right? Serious threats, really big challenges, climate disruption, the potential for pandemics, and this new technological wave, which could work out well or could work out poorly. And as somebody who is concerned primarily with jobs and justice in the digital age, gatherings like this give me a lot of hope because, you get the future that you fight for most of the time. You get the future that you work for and you plan for most of the time. But if you aren't even talking about it, you don't get a chance to do it. So I want to tell you a couple of stories that I think lay out a hidden peril for us. The kinds of problems that are coming down the pipe can be solved and can be addressed, but it will require us leveraging and accessing the genius of all parts of our population. You're not going to be able to deal with climate disruption, technological disruption, other forms of disruption, and waste tons and tons of genius which is what we're doing right now with communities of color, low-income communities, rural communities, we call Native American First Nation communities. We are wasting a ton of genius, and we can't afford it. We just can't afford it. And it's not about charity. It's not about charity. It's really about trying to figure out how we can solve the toughest problems with the best chance of success. And I want to give you a couple of stories that come out of my own life. There's a guy that I get a chance to work with. His name is Shaka Senghor. And Shaka Senghor spent 17 years in prison, 7 years in solitary confinement. If you know anything about the mental health profession, if you spend 14, 21 days in solitary confinement, you can go completely crazy. He spent 7 years in solitary confinement for a violent crime that he did in fact commit. But somehow in those circumstances, he reached inside himself and he transformed himself in a way that's so remarkable that by the time I met him, he was out of prison and was a fellow at MIT and turned MIT upside down because he proposed challenges to the students at MIT that they couldn't solve. He would take things that were available in prison, batteries, tape players, dental floss, stuff like that, and say, okay, use these materials and make a tattoo gun. Use these materials and make a hot plate, a burner, to warm up your food. Use these materials to strike a match and light a cigarette. And none of the genius kids at MIT could figure out how to do it. Though these are things that prisoners do every day. Engineering feats, hacking genius that people in prisons do every day. And he would do it over and over again to make a point. And the point was simply this. Had he found a student at MIT, and he never did, who could do any of the things that the prisoners were doing on a daily basis, they would have called that student a genius. And that student would have been celebrated at the highest levels of the university. If a prisoner is caught doing those very same things, they're called a rule breaker and they go in the hole. This doesn't just happen in prisons. In our schools, if you are a bright, white, affluent troublemaker in a private school, you're considered precocious and fast-tracked to some special program for genius kids. If you are exactly that kind of kid in an inner-city school, you're going to be expelled, if not put in prison. And so there's something going on, these legacies, that are actually taking the brightest, the most creative, the most innovative young people from some communities and actually punishing them because they're expected to somehow fit into these boxes that none of us expect our kids to fit into. And it is costing the society, not just them, but the society. Part of what I think we need to tap into quickly is that a lot of the jobs that are going to be wiped out are the old, automatable, both mental and mechanical jobs. Those jobs are going to go away first. It's hard to automate empathy, to your point. It's hard to automate intuition, creativity. And some of the most empathetic, intuitive, and creative people that we have are in some of these poor communities. In fact, if you look at hip-hop music, which is now it's replaced rock and roll as the global pop cultural form. There are people who were imprisoned last month in China because they were doing hip-hop, and China is afraid of hip-hop. It's just too potent as a cultural transfer force. Where did hip-hop come from? Hip hop came out of the Bronx when they took all the programs, all the art programs, the music programs out of the schools in a budget crisis. And so a bunch of young, poor, mostly black and Latino kids hacked into the New York City electrical grid in the parks and set up 2 turntables and a microphone and invented a musical form called hip hop because they didn't have horns to play. They didn't have violins anymore. So they put 2 turntables and a microphone, and now people around the world know who Snoop Doggy Dogg is. That's some genius stuff. I say that because the creativity, the ingenuity, the empathy, all that stuff which gets incubated in poor communities is not being accessed by the technological elite. In fact, at best, the view is, I mean, you could cheer or cry, but it's true. At best, we see those communities as consumers of technology. And it's true that African American and Latino kids in the United States actually over-index for participation on social media platforms. There's something that's called Black Twitter. I thought it was a company. It's not. It's just regular Twitter that black people use. But that's a step. That's a step. But can you imagine if those same communities of folks who know how to download apps could upload them? What problems would they be able to identify and solve without government help, without political protests, without the political parties agreeing on anything? If you took the tools, the training, the technology, and pushed it to the communities that actually have problems to solve, how many problems might get solved? Now, so far, that's not the direction that we're going. We get described as pessimists, but part of it is just a practical experience of, for instance, what's going on in Oakland, California. When I was in my 20s, I was very proud of myself because I was an organizer in Oakland. Oakland is a tough town, at least it was when I was a young activist. Oakland City Council has 10 different political factions and only 7 members. Okay? It's a very tough town to organize. And home the Black Panthers, it was, but it's where I cut my teeth as a community organizer, community activist. You go to West Oakland now, and you see an awful lot of kale and yoga and bike shops. And this is disquieting. And everybody gets mad at the Trump voters, but, if I could build a wall around Oakland and make Silicon Valley pay for it, I might do that. Because, change is hard. Oakland is half an hour from Silicon Valley. It's half an hour, rush hour, 90 minutes, but at night, it's half an hour from the campus of Google, the campus of Facebook, the campus of Apple. And yet, the young people go into those schools where you got 32 kids in a classroom, 6 books, and no chalk, can never get jobs on those campuses. And so there's something happening. It's not just pessimism on our part. There's a sense of concern that you have 2 different realities that are right next to each other right now already. And that you have an economy in Silicon Valley built on genius, and you've got some of the most creative kids ever born 30 minutes away, and they can't find their way to each other. Now, that's not an economic problem. It's not a technological problem. It's a social problem. It's a political problem. It's a spiritual problem. It's a spiritual problem.
Yes.
And so, if we're going to have these technologies do more good than bad, sooner rather than later, then it's not just a smart thing, it's a hard thing. And those two things start to work together. And so, let me just suggest a few ideas that I find intriguing. Number one, schools. Number two, women. And number three, education, different than the schools. I don't think people understand how badly the schools that are broken are broken. Our president has a great set of solutions. He wants to ship more guns into our schools. I would suggest he reconsider. The schools that are broken are broken in ways that's almost impossible to describe. I talk to kids regularly who have been to way more funerals than they've ever been to graduations. I mean, that's just a reality in some of our American schools. But the problem is that even the schools that are not broken are almost laughably irrelevant to what the young people are going through because of the way the curriculum works. Young people are in a different era. The previous speaker mentioned jumping from the agricultural age to the industrial. Let me suggest that that's exactly the right metaphor. Time works differently in the digital age. Time itself works differently in the digital age to the human mind than time worked in the industrial era or in the agricultural and indigenous eras. And this is important when you're trying to get young people to take you seriously. In the indigenous and agricultural societies, time functions more like a circle. It's more like a cycle of seasons. The sun goes up, the sun comes down. Winter, spring, summer, fall, winter, spring, summer, fall. So time, the past and the future are not distinct. And therefore, the main value for survival is preservation. Preservation of culture, preservation of seed, preservation of ritual, because tomorrow and yesterday are the same thing. Suddenly along comes the industrial era, and time itself, as it occurs to humans, changes. Suddenly time is now linear. The past is behind you. The present is with you. And the future is someplace over there. You're like on a train, on a track, and you're going someplace. And the future will be different than the past. And the key for you then is planning, not preservation, planning. What future are you going to arrive at will be determined by your ability to plan. And so the entire industrial economy and all the educational institutions are all about your ability to plan. And, well, what's your plan? What are you going to be when you grow up? Well, what's your major going to be? All this sort of stuff. And when you look at your actual life, though, how's all that planning working out for you? But there you go. I mean, you're patterned into it. The kids think you're nuts. They don't listen to you because they think there's something wrong with you. They haven't seen one of your plans work out yet. So this creates this challenge. Why? Because in the digital age, time functions differently. In the digital age, time is still linear. But there's a new form of time. Time is still linear. But it's ludicrous to say that you're on a train and you're going to go get the future. No, the future is onrushing. You have a new thing called an onrushing future. New apps, new technologies, new stuff coming at you all the time. They're changing your phone while you're sitting on it. You didn't plan for that. Snapchat now sucks. That wasn't in your plan. So, you know what I'm talking about. You're like, delete? Insta all the way now. I don't know what you guys did to my Snapchat. So you have this onrushing future. And the key is not preservation, though you have to preserve some things. It's not planning, though you have to do some planning. But it's being prepared to pivot. Preparation to pivot is the key value, not your ability to have some long-term plan and stick to it. And so a different kind of kid who's pivoting all the time, you want to medicate or put in jail. But that kid is actually better adapted to the situation that you're in, and your school's not. It's not your kid that's messed up, your school's messed up. So we got to deal with that. We got to deal with that and stop punishing genius and wasting genius. The other thing I want to point to is women. Look, it turns out there are a lot of them. And they got a lot to say, and thank goodness. Listen, this whole idea of diversity as some charitable thing or something you got to do so you don't get Me Too'd or something, right? That's got to go. There is a company, I won't name it, but there's a corporation in my country that was trying to figure out how to power, you've heard this story before, but I love it, so I'm going to say it again and just laugh at the appropriate point. But they were trying to figure out how to power wearable technology, because the technology is getting so small, it's going to be in a button, it's going to be in an earring, it's going to be in your glasses, it's going to be so small that you're going to be able to wear this stuff. And then the question is, how do you plug in an earring? Like, how are you going to plug the earring in at night? And so this company went and got their best engineers, all dudes, their smartest engineers, all guys, to try to figure this thing out. And they spent 9 months on it, and they couldn't come up with any good ideas, and they're yelling and screaming, and a female engineer, not considered the best, just female, happened to walk through the room, literally trying to get some coffee, and listen to this nonsense that they were talking about. And of course, she's a woman. They don't even know she's there. They're doing their thing. So finally, the woman, after listening to this for a little while, says, "Excuse me, it's a very simple question. Does anyone here actually wear earrings?" No. Does anyone here actually wear brooches or wear any kind of jewelry at all? No. Well, let me just give you a little bit of insight. Every woman, when they come home, they take their jewelry off and they put it in a bowl. Have the bowl be the recharger. I kid you not, that is a $1 billion idea. It's a $1 billion idea. Why? Because you added one new perspective to the process, and you saw a whole new world of opportunity. I tell people all the time, you can hire 3 people. You give them all the same test. No problem with that. One gets 7 out of 10. The other gets 7 out of 10. The other gets 3 out of 10. So I can only hire 2. Who do I hire? Everybody says, I'll hire the 2 that got 7 out of 10. No, you idiot. If those 2 got the same 7 right and the same 3 wrong, and the third one got 7 wrong but got those 3 right that the other 2 didn't get right, hire number 1 and number 3, and you can solve any problem. We're not hiring individuals. We're creating teams and networks to solve tough problems. We got to think about this stuff differently. And so the last thing I'll say is I had a chance to work with the president, I didn't say the former president. I got a chance to work with President Obama, and I also got a chance to work with a guy named Prince. I went from working for the president to working with Prince in pretty much any country that's called a promotion. So I got a chance to work with Prince, and we created something called Yes We Code. And it has been one of the most remarkable educational experiences of my life. We're connecting those urban youth to Silicon Valley. And here's what we've discovered. I'll sit down with this. Every time we do a hackathon or a gathering, we reach out to some of the top engineers, Google, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest. I mean, some of the best companies in the world. They've been incredibly generous. I love them very much. And they send their engineers over to talk with our young people, and they talk about the apps that our young people are developing. And in about 20 minutes, every single time, the engineers from these top firms start getting quiet. They come in talking, and about 20 minutes they start realizing something, they start getting quiet. And then they just stop talking, and they just start listening. And they hear these young people with these incredibly tough problems, and yet these incredibly innovative ideas about what they could do if they had an app that would better monitor what was going on with like the bus services. They could avoid certain gang activity, or could help them understand, give them alerts on when their court dates might happen. So they could tie that in with the map. Incredibly tough problems, brilliant solutions. And every time, it's never been an exception, every time they walk away thinking to myself, my God, this gathering of talent and discussion is so much richer, so much smarter, so much more advanced than anything we're doing back at the shop. We're doing some of the best stuff in the world. We've got to stop wasting genius, and I agree with them. Thank you very much.
And can I just ask you to give a round of applause for both of our speakers tonight. All right, everybody, I get to do the first few questions here before you get your crack at them. And I'm going to actually start with you, Anne-Marie, because when you were outlining your 3 different areas, you did talk about craft, and I work in a craft. I don't work in a profession. And technology hasn't really served my profession, my craft, very well. It's disrupted it to the point of being incredibly damaging. You seem to say in your talk that technology is the answer to these kinds of craft, with marriage of old craft and new technologies. Does it serve every craft the same? Is it a future for every single kind of craft, or is there a certain quality that needs to be achieved?
So the first thing to say, I am not there's nothing good or bad in technology per se. Technology is a tool. Indeed, if you go back again to the Industrial Revolution, everyone was deeply worried about the industrial tools that Thoreau said we're becoming the tools of our tools. The sort of, and so technology. This is just the latest round. I think there are opportunities for pretty much every craft to reemerge in ways that technology will enable, and I would say even media. And I absolutely agree with the kind of journey we've seen. But what I see in the US now is people have started to realize, okay, we're going to go back to a subscription model and a nonprofit community membership model, both of which are enabled still by technology, and increasingly it's going to go toward micropayments for individual articles. So instead of everything being free, you'll be able to surf the web and you'll click on something and you'll pay whoever, the platform, the company, 3 cents or 10 cents, but in a way that actually will allow many, many more people to write. So this goes actually to Van's point. There are massive numbers of talented young people who want to tell their stories who never got past the gatekeepers of the Globe and Mail or the New York Times or all of that. So even there, I can see a new age of journalism coming that returns to craft, because there's no question that, clickbait is not the great craft of reporting or writing, but does it in a way that is more democratic and more open and more creative.
Okay. Then your talk was very much outlining the state of play right now and overlooking those who could really bring something great to our society, bring more productivity to our society, and that's the current state of play. And I'm just wondering, you say these are the challenges. You got any idea how to meet those challenges, how to bring that change so that they are utilized?
No.
Okay, let's go home.
But all the talent in this audience is going to have that answer.
Well, I mean, I do have some ideas in that, part of it is that the strategy for what we call racial justice or social justice or social progress has been too focused, I think, on the state, on governments. And so, if you take the black community, it was a march on Washington that Dr. King led. It wasn't a march on Wall Street, right? So there's a bias toward expecting governments to be the main driver of progress, and government will be a partner. But the reality is the future used to be written in laws, in the capitals, in the West. Now the future is written in code, computer code in Silicon Valley and in tech startups. And I think that part of just recognizing that you have a whole new generation of entrepreneurs that are building the future we're going to live in, their level of consciousness, concern, and commitment can bump the society one way or the other. Mm-hmm. And so I think shifting our advocacy to the to the technologist, a lot of the philosophy that undergirds the present generation of technologists is very libertarian. That certainly has its benefits. But there are other ways of looking at the world that have not been competing for hearts and minds among the technologists. And so I think we need to be enlisting the technologists to be a part of social change, social discussion, and we also need to be preparing the people who have those problems. Listen, when I was coming up, everybody wanted to go to law school. If you wanted to make a difference in the world, go to law school, be a lawyer, run for office, do something like that. I would say, to a young person today, build a startup and hire a lawyer. Mm-hmm. That would be my advice to you. I do think that we're at a place where the choices that people make can be massively consequential, positive or negative. And for those of us who are very close to the communities that I'm talking about, mm-hmm. and who see the opportunities and who see the breakdowns, the first thing is just showing up at places like this and making sure that this is a part of the conversation.
Right.
And if I can just add to that, it's actually just a different kind of code. In the common law, we don't call it code, but obviously in Quebec or in Louisiana, that it is a legal code. Law is just a way of solving problems. It's one kind of code, and now the technology is just another. And you actually need both. We're both lawyers initially. Yep. Tech won't work without good laws to regulate it and channel it, but it is exactly a mixture of different kinds of code that are useful to solve problems.
You actually have 3 lawyers up here. None of them is actually practicing law.
None of us practicing law. The secret to happy law, happy lawyers.
I'm interested in the idea, though, that what the role of government will actually be going forward, or even what the role of government is now. And I think about things like the social safety net. Will there be a need for that? Who will provide that? Should young people who are growing up in the workforce right now just discard any idea that there is going to be anything like a social safety net in the work world of the future, either one of you.
There has to be. I mean, one of the things that you're seeing as you look toward the gig economy or the contingent economy or the on-demand economy, and by the way, that's not new ride sharing or Airbnb. That's contingent contractors, right? All the people who've been pushed out of regular jobs and who work on demand, who now work, essentially kind of more of a temp way. You have to have a safety net to make that possible. If you have the ability to build assets, you have your health care, you have a way to provide for your future and additional support there, then this world of work looks really much different, because it looks like you can put different things together. You've got lifelong learning. You have the ability to do some of this and some of that. That's great. Without that, it's really scary. Again, you may have work, you may have something you're doing, but you're not building. We're seeing in the U.S. a serious run at universal basic income. I think in many ways, I would just call that an expansion of the earned income tax credit. It basically means that people who are working get money from the government, not in recognition that they're working, and giving them support, and that would include all the current unpaid care work. Right? So if you have, the government provides a certain basis and your work, if you demonstrate that you're working, that's not going to support everyone, but I think we're going to have to reinvent our safety net.
Okay, Ben, anything?
Yeah, I agree with all that. One of the things that I wrestle with in my own mind, as you think about universal basic income, is people do well when they have a purpose.
Yeah.
When they can fulfill a certain calling, when they're in community. And I wonder if we even conceptually, if we miss an opportunity for more social cohesion. I'm not opposed to public works. I'm not opposed to service corps. I'm not opposed to people getting paid to do something, even if it's back near the Work Progress Administration we had in the United States during the Great Depression, where we were paying artists, but we weren't paying them to, we were paying them to do art, and we were paying them to do things that they had a calling in their life to do. And so I want, for me, because part of what's happening is the tribalization of life in the West, of people breaking away from this idea of a shared, fate and these extremist groups and all this sort of stuff. And I just wonder, if we're going to have to rework everything anyway, maybe give people a chance to work together and see each other as human beings, and maybe you can solve some of the economic dislocation, but also some of the social dislocation with the same dollar.
Well, I just wonder then, in that context, with what you were referring to before as the more libertarian approach of the technologists, do unions have a place in this world?
Well, I mean, I'm a leftist, so yes. I mean, I don't. But I think that, I say that with, some humility, in that I think, we have to be willing to look in the mirror. Some of the frankly, the unions haven't been that friendly or that open to people who look like me in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Or people who look like me.
Yeah. And so we're in this weird situation now where our Supreme Court may essentially obliterate most of our unions, because they may say that, well, you don't have to pay them anymore. And then unions that we were never, some of the unions, SEIU being different, but some of the unions that we were never fully a part of may need our help. And so it's a weird moment that we're in, and so this stuff gets confusing and complicated. I think unions are good. I think anything that brings more social solidarity, social cohesion, a sense of community, a sense of common purpose is good, beyond whatever economic benefits there are. And I think people, frankly, not having that is why we have so much wackadoodle nonsense going on in our country.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're aligned. What I would say is organized labor is necessary, right? Workers being able to come together and exercise collective power is essential. whether that's a union in the way it was 100 years ago or new ways of organizing, and there are people who are pioneering that. I'd probably put my money on new ways, but the idea that you have unbelievable concentration of economic power at one end and completely fissured and separated workers on the other doesn't work. It's been interesting. I've been here for 3 days and I've walked the Sea Walk many of those days, and I've read the stories, and they are stories of miners' unions and other workers' battles here, and it's extraordinary to see them told and celebrated. It had to happen 100 years ago. It's going to have to happen again, but I'm just not convinced that it will look like the unions we grew up with.
But certainly was a suggestion that one of the reasons Vancouver didn't get the Amazon HQ was because of the strength of the unions in this province, which raises, which raises another issue that's certainly of concern to young people in Vancouver, but probably in other places as well. I mean, we have a city here where there's a shortage of workers for many of the jobs here. But the fact is that they can't afford to live here with most of the jobs that are on offer to them. How do you deal with that? I see a lot of silence here.
Well, so I'm just going to say, I've had a number of conversations about Vancouver real estate prices, and there are no jobs that are going to pay you enough to buy a house at those prices. I mean,
but I think it is a job a problem that would actually reflect in several cities as well, like San Francisco as well.
Absolutely.
And I gather that you would like to see a world where you were talking about the care economy, where people are actually paid for the value of their job, but I don't know how we get there.
Well, I mean, you have to have a workforce housing strategy,
Yeah, you do.
period. I mean, we're having the same problem in the Bay Area where, what made the Bay Area cool is getting wiped out because it's so cool, and you've got to be able to have, you got to have artists and weirdos to be able to stay in the city. And so, that's where I think some enlightened self-interest is important. I mean, I think the lack of you have so many people who are millennials now. I'm talking about the Bay Area now. Mm-hmm. I mean, who suddenly they're like billionaires or multi-millionaires, or on track to becoming that. And that used to not happen to you, or if it happened to you, it happened to you later in your life, and maybe you might have a different sense of civic commitment and connection. You have very young people with a lot of economic power, at least in the Bay Area, and they're going to have to be more socially conscious and generous if the Bay Area is going to be cool, and if Vancouver is going to be cool. I mean, what I would say about it is, look, this is only a hard problem to solve because the conversation is so diminished. I mean, we've solved tougher problems than this in the West often. I mean, figuring out a way to do workforce housing is simple stuff. We did that in the 30s and the 40s. It's not hard stuff. But then you go to a city council meeting and people think that, you're talking about Stalinism. It doesn't. So I think a part of it is just having a richer conversation about it.
And I mean, so I'm with Van there too. At the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, 100 years ago, in the US, and I think here too, you had no wage or hour legislation, no working condition legislation. You could be required to work for 16 hours for nothing in unbelievably unsafe conditions. It was
when you were 8.
When you were 8, right? No child labor laws, no social regulation, no health and safety regulation. Well, we invented all that, and we did it in part because of unions, but we also did it exactly because of enlightened self-interest. Henry Ford basically figured out, if I don't pay my workers enough, they can't buy my cars. That's a problem. And I would say similarly today, to think about investing in care, that is a smart investment for any society. The other thing I would say is, I'm sorry, but if women actually ran the world, this wouldn't be a problem. I mean, it just wouldn't. I mean, in terms of what would you think it was important to invest in? And what we actually know is once you open that space for conversation, plenty of men agree with you. This is not a biological thing. There are plenty of men who think it would make a whole lot more sense to be paying for early educators, for teachers, for compensating people for the time they spend investing in old people and young people and taking care of all those whom we love. But we just have we've got divisions, we've got sort of gender dynamics and political dynamics that make it impossible to have that conversation.
And testosterone poisoning of the brain. Look, I mean,
I got 2 sons, 2 brothers. I have no problem with testosterone.
No, but I mean, just like testosterone poisoning of the brain. I mean, I mean, you're being very kind to men, but I think that part of what we learned over this past year is that the blind spots are massive on the part of men in society like this. You know, I met Ai-jen Poo, who of course is a great leader in our country in labor, you know, bringing these issues around the caring economy. And when she talks, it is so just awe-inspiringly obvious when she says it. But I never thought about it. I consider myself to be a good liberal progressive guy. I'm, you know, kind to my mom. I had never considered a syllable of what she had said when she was talking about, you know, the incredible amount of labor, paid and unpaid, on the part of women, often women of color, often immigrant women, that keep the entire country together, holding to. I had never thought about it.
So you elect those women?
Yeah, so
and,
I mean,
you know, you make different choices.
And I say this because I do think that viewpoint diversity matters. I do think that no matter how well-intentioned I am as a heterosexual, middle-aged, middle-class, you know, guy, there's just stuff I don't have to think about. My sister does a lot of that. I have a twin sister. She does a lot of that in my family. I'll send a check. She does the work. And I can't stress this enough. There's this backlash now among a lot of men, among a lot of white folks, among a lot of heterosexual folks, that these people are just on some rant and they're on some tear, and they're just, you know, being like bossy and uppity and kind of rude and kind of mean, and I don't like it. And that's the main set of reactions, as opposed to saying, these people are about to make me really, really smart. I'm about to be the smartest person ever because I'm going to be learning from all these other people. And I still get to know the stuff I knew before. There is no loss. This is great. Okay, that should be the attitude.
Can I get you to address one more topic before I bring out the questions from the audience? And that is, it's a comparison between Canada and the US. Do you think that Canada is better positioned?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Whatever it is.
Yes. I should have seen that one coming.
Whatever the rest of your question is, the answer is yes.
For this brave new work, because of its different approach to immigration than the current United States. And I'm assuming that you know that we are generally, I'm not saying we're doing everything perfectly, but are generally more welcoming of immigrants and understand that they need to come into this country to provide a workforce to keep the
Look,
economies growing.
I don't understand my president's position on immigration or much else, but what I would say is I like, when I'm in competition, to cheat, okay? When I play Candyland with my children, if they look away, I'm trying to find the little, you know, the right card for myself because I like to win and I have low self-esteem. So I like to cheat in competition if I can. And I watch the Olympics.
I'm going to talk to your mother.
Hey, listen, she's done her best.
Is that
But I watch the
testosterone thing
Olympics.
again.
I watch the Olympics, and I watch the United States go and win all this stuff. And here's what I notice about our team. We cheat. We have stolen all the best people from everywhere. You see the Chinese team, it's all Chinese people, God bless them. You see the team from Kenya, it's all Kenyans, God bless them. You see the American team, we got everybody. So we get to win a lot. Why would we stop cheating? Why would we stop stealing all the best people? We're gonna lose the Olympics. It's going to be a boring country. So for me, I just think out of pure American pride and laziness, we should let everybody come. That's my basic thinking.
I'm not really sure I'm going to compete with that.
Yeah,
but
that's
I do want to say, I think there are so many things that Canada is doing right that we are not, and around essentially the basic safety net. Canada is not perfect by any means, but I've talked to American immigrants who are moving north because they could not get the basic building blocks of how then to take advantage of the opportunity that gets them to be the fabulous contributors that they are. So in so many ways, sort of understanding that basic social compact, understanding the values of openness, understanding the safety net, absolutely. I will say that there are lots of parts of the United States that are just ignoring Washington. They are sick of it. They're sick of the complete dysfunction, the breakdown of democracy, and they're getting it together. They're coming together, and they're surprising places like the Golden Triangle in Mississippi, or Sioux Falls, South Dakota, or Easton, Maine, these smaller, medium-sized towns that are being creative. And I have a lot of faith in the creativity of many Americans. If you give them the space and you bring them together and you bring lots of different viewpoints together, I have the faith that we can, in fact, tackle these problems.
Okay. We now have some time for our audience questions. Who's going to pick them up? The envelope, please. I have no idea what they say. All right. This is for both of you. In this new economy, how can we decolonize and ensure there is equity, diversity, and inclusion so all communities are represented? Van, why don't you take that on first?
Yeah, it's going to be hard, but I think one of the things I keep trying to point out, especially to communities of color, sometimes we self-select out of some of these spaces, in the sense that, that's not where we're going to be welcome, or that's not our thing, and and I've been trying to point out to people that, even in the hip-hop community where I have very strong roots, Jay-Z is a technologist. Mm-hmm. He runs a company called Tidal, which is a streaming service. Tidal is competing with Spotify. will.i.am from the Black Eyed Peas has he has an augmented reality feature on his most recent comic book thing that he did, and he's got a company where he's doing like natural language computation. Dr. Dre. Dr. Dre made more money selling the company Beats by Dre than he ever made money making beats as Dre. So, so there is this growing, technology-oriented set of people who are coming out of the African American community. And, Prince used to be very concerned about this pattern. That's a very long pattern now of people of color being creative, coming up with the art, and then the wealth landing in other communities. So, the financiers or the managers or the agents or the label at the studio, exactly, being able to get all the money while it's actually the creative class in our community remains poor or remains vulnerable. And so I think a big opportunity in technology is for creators to actually be owners and to capture and to keep some of that value. And so, but Velcro takes two sides to stick. It's very important, I think, that the existing technology class or the high-tech digital overlords or whoever they are, for them to be more open-minded and to be more interested and to also see the value of partnership. But also, I think it's important for communities of color to say, listen, here's, especially to our younger people, this is a much better avenue. You're much more likely to be successful financially and otherwise if you pursue this. And so it's going to take both sides, reaching out to each other. But I do think that the good people say, well, Van, it's very great what you say, and everybody gets very excited, but these black kids aren't really that successful in technology. I'm like, you're talking about artificial intelligence, blockchain, and space? The white kids ain't winning there either. Nobody is winning on that. This is a very, very small number of people who figured this stuff out, and most people in most communities have not been able to participate yet. And so there is a chance, I think, for some of the communities, Native American, Latino, lower income Asian, African Americans, Appalachian, poor folks, to leapfrog, to actually get a chance to be first in the door on blockchain, first in the door on artificial intelligence, and to benefit and to change those industries in a way that's more inclusive down the field.
And Marie?
I'd just add, I agree with that, but I would add also, the question is which teams beat which teams. And cognitive diversity, what Van's talking about, is real, right? You put together that team of the person who got 7 and the person who got 3, and that team will beat the team of the 2 7s. And so increasingly, the way this is going to happen is you get people in and you demonstrate, as you can demonstrate that that businesses that hire more women outperform businesses that don't. Every time you can show it. So I really think as we build toward team approaches, it's just cognitive diversity, and cognitive diversity leads to racial, ethnic, gender, income, rural, urban, lots of other kinds of diversity.
Let me just say too, because again, I've noticed that this sort of backlash in the diversity conversation, like this is, don't call it diversity, call it anti-stupid. Because that's really what it is.
That
it's
is right.
anti-stupid. The thing about these bigotries and biases that we all have is that it just gets in the way of you being smart. You're talking about basic. There's no argument, in terms of the science, the research or studies. Diverse teams outperform non-diverse teams. But we get all triggered and weird and say, this is, somebody's trying to oppress me by trying to have me have a team that can win more. Like, that's really what's going on. It's like, your team will win more. And the reaction is, somebody's being mean to me, and don't call me male, or don't call me white, or don't call me heterosexual. It's like, guys, no. We're trying to help us help you win.
Okay, just a reminder to everybody, these are the questions that have been voted as the top questions by you. This is quite a philosophical question. Is finding meaning in work a luxury or a necessity for a healthy, resilient society?
So it's softball in some ways, but so yes, I think Van and I absolutely believe that work is important for meaning and purpose, and that's where I agree. The idea of universal basic income, where you sort of pay people not to work, and then that's crazy. The only way it'll work is if it's a support. And even there, it needs to be tied to work. I think of course, meaning and purpose in work matter, but we did a number of studies, and for most people right now, the majority of people, the most important thing they want out of work is stability of income. Knowing they're going to have a certain amount every month, more so than meaning and purpose. So it's a little like, it's Maslow's hierarchy. You get up to here, we count on steady income. Yeah, at that point, you would prefer to get steady income with something that gives you meaning and purpose. But if you don't have steady income, you'll take that first. So at the other piece, I think, again, is we need to recognize unpaid work as work. I'm not proposing that we pay every family member who cares for another family member, although I am think that should be part of Social Security, or all the ways that people volunteer, that people do important work that isn't paid for. We don't have to pay them, but we do have to recognize that is important, purposeful, meaningful work, and honor it that way, at least as we treat people socially. So, when you say, what do you do? And you say, I'm taking care of my kids, you don't fall off the, people go, I'm not interested in that person. That person clearly is not somebody worth talking to. So we do need to value work in different ways, but there are many, many different kinds of work.
Okay.
Amen.
I'm going to combine these two and ask them at the same time because they're somewhat related. What can we do about the increasing need for higher and higher levels of education for entry-level jobs? How do universities need to change and adapt to the new world of work? Are they equipping students with the skills to succeed? And these are both to both of you.
Higher education needs to be, it needs to be and is being pretty radically reinvented. You have to move to sort of lifelong learning and learning that is experience-based. So with a lot of there are a certain number of jobs that don't need this level, but a lot of these jobs will. But if you take the kids you're talking about in Oakland, there is no reason that they can't be learning and earning at the same time, and what they're earning on a job converts to credentials. It's effectively the way we get the credentials that get us jobs has to move from pedigree to performance. So instead of that degree, that fancy piece of paper, and I say that having gotten an awful lot of those certificates that are pedigree, but honestly, it's got to be much more flexible to respond. When you said that the future's coming at you, you cannot sort of say, as my father could say to me, go to college, go to law school, get a job in a good firm, you're set for life. There's nothing I can tell my children that's true of. Absolutely nothing. So what I can tell them is, yes, develop adaptability, creativity, flexibility, and be prepared to constantly be learning and earning in different ways.
Ben?
Yeah. The only thing I'd add to that is I think that we have to change people's expectations about what education is. A lot of, I'm educating myself in every moment. I mean, I'm audiobooking, while the audiobook is going, I'm like reading, and a big part of it is the challenge is actually not the learning, it's the unlearning. The big problem that we have now is that we have to unlearn so much crap that
we learned in universities.
Yeah, it's the stuff that made me a really, really good organizer and political person 10 or 15 years ago is actually in my way now. I was trained by some of the best people in American politics to build, hierarchies that could advocate against governments. That's what organizing was. I was the organizer. You pick a leader. You go yell at the mayor and pass your bill and ask for some grant money. That's how it works. So that I've had to realize, knowing that is actually in the way of me learning how to make change now. Mm-hmm. I mean, how do philanthropic elites and not-for-profit elites perform in the era of the hashtag? How does the foundation fund a hashtag, right? We have literally a month ago, if you had said that, gun control, gun safety legislation was a meaningful option in the US, somebody would have laughed at you. In a couple weeks, we may have the biggest march in American history in Washington, D.C. on guns. Now, what's so amazing, though, is that none of those young people who have sparked this thing and who are driving this thing forward went to our organizer training camps and all the stuff that we had to go through when we were their age to have the right to knock on doors for a candidate or for a not-for-profit. They just damn did the thing. And so, you know, a big part of the learning now is the unlearning and being able to recognize a paradigm as a paradigm and delete it and build a new one and then delete that one and build a new one. And that's a lot of work. And if you expect the university to do that work for you, if you expect to be able to show up and be a passive consumer and be like, wow, my brain isn't, you know, full of the stuff I wanted to, this is a cafeteria of knowledge or something wrong with the cafeteria. No, that's not how it works. We have to actually create knowledge as we go. Unlearning, creating knowledge, sharing it inside of networks, all that is not only the responsibility of the university, it's the responsibility of us to understand the world that we're operating in.
Okay. There is obviously so much more that we could be talking about, but our time is coming. Well, just sit still for a second. Okay. To an end. I'd like to invite Anita Braha from Vancity out onto the stage.
Good evening. It's thrilling to be here, and it's been wonderful to hear our presenters and our moderator. I want to begin my remarks by acknowledging that we're gathering on the unceded traditional territory of the Coast Salish people. Those are the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish. And I want to acknowledge that these have been custodians of this land for thousands and thousands of years. And I want to pay my respect to elders, both past and present. There are a number of thank yous for me to make. Let me start with President Andrew Petter and Simon Fraser University for hosting this event tonight. I want to thank as well Van Jones, Anne-Marie Slaughter for their wonderful and insightful commentary, and of course, Laura Lynch for her expert moderation. Or as I would like to refer to them as, the three lawyers. I have a confession to make. I want you to note this as the goodness that lawyers bring to the world. You know, Vancity is fortunate to be working with SFU again. This community summit is fantastic. It's exactly the kind of conversations that we should be having. You know, in these geopolitical times, it seems to me that it is even more apt that we're gathering together, we're hearing from the experts that you've heard from this evening, and we're actually putting our minds, our thoughts, our hearts to trying to address some of these problems. You know, when I reflect on what I heard this evening, and I have a lot of things that I'd love to say, how much time do we have? Here are some of the things that you've made me think about. One is the importance of embedding and embracing our connections with each other, with our communities, with the planet, when we talk about work and work of the future. You know, as a human rights lawyer, I spent decades working to address and redress discrimination using a variety of legal routes. And what you realize pretty quickly, representing what I used to call the unrepresented or the underrepresented or members of disadvantaged groups, is that these folks face not just legal problems, but as you've heard tonight, these are social, political, and ideological problems. And it's heartening to hear, as we did tonight, that it's the connections that we need to make, the connections between jobs and justice, the connections between genius that exists in all of our communities, and the losses that we face because we're not benefiting from all that genius. The losses that we have endured in our societies because of the double standards and the discrimination. It's heartening to hear that what we need is vision, we need boldness, we need a commitment in our own beliefs that we can create the world that we want, one community at a time. You know, there's a sense of optimism in this room, a confidence that we can harness globalization, that we can harness automation and use it for good. The future is now. At Vancity, we work with many, many types of organizations who provide stable and meaningful work to those who want to make a difference in their communities. I see the motivation that we all have to do better every day. I see it in our communities across this province, and I've seen it here specifically today. I want to thank you again, thank our panelists and our moderator, and thank you in particular for attending. Have a wonderful evening.